So, there are moments in the life of an institution that call for pause, reflection, and celebration. Tonight, as we mark the 100th lecture of Voices from the Periphery, we are reminded of the extraordinary journey that ideas take from whispers of dissent to the clarion calls of scholarship, from questions that unsettle to insights that illuminate. And in this moment, we are deeply privileged to be guided by one of the most luminous historians of our time, Professor Sugata Bose. Professor Bose's work compels us to see history not as a static record of events, but as a living, contested, and dynamic field, a terrain where vision, courage, and imagination intersect. He has shown us that the story of modern India can't be captured in singular narrative of linear timelines. Figures like Subhash Chandra Bose emerge not merely as icons and heroic nationalism, but as actors whose lives and choices illuminate the multiplicity of aspirations, strategies, and ideologies that shaped the nation's freedom struggle. What distinguishes Professor Bose is his ability to traverse the local and the global, the personal and the political. Through meticulous archival research, rigorous historiographical analysis, and a deep engagement with memory and myth, he reveals alternative visions of nationalism, paths less celebrated, voices often marginalized, and strategies that challenge conventional understanding. His scholarship spans a remarkable range of work, including 100 Horizons, the Indian Ocean in the Age of Global Empire, which reshapes our understanding of India's connections to the wider world. Modern South Asia, History, Culture, Political Economy, co-authored with Aisha Jalal, a foundational text for understanding the complexities of the region, and His Majesty's opponent, Subhash Chandra Bose and India's struggle against empire, a landmark study that situates Bose's life and vision within the turbulent politics of decolonization. Through this and other works, he teaches us that history is not only to be studied but to be debated, interrogated, and lived. Tonight, as he addresses the theme Subhash Chandra Bose and alternative nationalism, Professor Bose invites us to reconsider the very meaning of leadership, freedom, and nationhood. He asks us to confront urgent questions that echo across time. How do we alternative visions of nationalism emerge? Whose narratives are amplified and whose remain unheard? How do the interplay of memory, strategy, and ideology reshape the stories we tell about our past and ourselves? On this milestone occasions, we are not only honoring the 100th lecture of Voices from the Periphery, but also celebrating the presence of a scholar whose work exemplifies the spirit of inquiry, courage, and imagination that has brought us to this moment. Professor Bose reminds us that history is never fully written. It is a conversation that we continue to have with our past, our present, and the possibilities of our future. On behalf of Voices from the Periphery, it is a profound honor to welcome Professor Sugata Bose. His presence tonight transforms this milestone into a moment of reflection, inspiration, and extraordinary engagement with the past, arguing us to think critically, expansively, and courageously about the nation we inhabit and the histories we inherit. Professor, up to you.
Thank you very much, Vallabh and the Voices from the Periphery. I'm delighted to join your milestone event, your 100th lecture or scholarly interaction. And I had mentioned that I would, of course, like to have this session based on questions that you might pose to me. But perhaps I should begin by saying that when we consider Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's complex relationship with Mahatma Gandhi, we should move away from a very easy dichotomy that is often proposed between one representing non-violence and the other leading an armed struggle. At the very outset, I would want to assert that there were many discursive and organizational connections between the nonviolent mass movements that were led by Mahatma Gandhi from 1919, 1920 onwards, and the strand of revolutionary resistance which reached its climax in Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's Azad Hind Fauj between 1943 and 1945. So I would simply want to clear the decks by saying that we need to call into question the easy non-violence versus violence dichotomy, and instead try to examine where these different streams of anti-colonial nationalism stood on the question of egalitarianism between classes, between genders, between castes, and so on, where they stood in terms of what should be the appropriate basis for unity among India's diverse religious communities. And, those are the elements that I would wish to expound on in today's conversation with you. So to begin with, I will simply say that if we are thinking in terms of the alternative leadership that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose provided, it had something to do with a more resolute commitment to equality. And this moved away from the Gandhian philosophy of class conciliation. Now, Netaji was not necessarily advocating, class conflict of the type which many other socialists and communists were doing at that time. He was still thinking in terms of samya, equality. Shamobad was his philosophy. That is a word that encapsulates the essence of his political philosophy, but an equality that could exist in a context of balance and harmony. And also, when it came to the question of what ought to be the appropriate relationship in bringing together differences of language, of religion, and so on, from very early on, Subhash Chandra Bose advocated what he called cultural intimacy. And this is very different from Nehruvian secularism. Nehru tended to be rather impatient of any expressions of difference. Subhash Chandra Bose, being from Bengal, understood that differences often had to be respected in order to arise above them and build unity. But at the same time, he was also somewhat different from a Mahatma Gandhi, who believed in Hindu-Muslim unity, but at least at the time when Subhash Chandra Bose joined the movement of non-cooperation led by Mahatma Gandhi, you find that Gandhiji was, of course, working very closely with the Ali brothers, Muhammad Ali and Shaukat Ali. But he would not even dine together with them. So he was taking difference to an extreme, at least at this, private level. Now, Gandhiji changed his views over the course of time, but Subhash Chandra Bose believed in cultural intimacy from the very beginning. And he displayed it, of course, in the climactic moment of India's struggle for independence. Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian soldiers would dine together before they went to shed their blood together in the armed struggle for freedom. And Netaji's great success lay in getting Mahatma Gandhi to change his mind. When Gandhiji went to see the INA prisoners in the Kabul lines and in the Red Fort, he was told that the British were serving them Hindu tea and Muslim tea separately. And Gandhi asked, why do you suffer it? And the reply came from the INA soldiers that we don't. I mean, we had no differences when we fought together under Netaji's leadership. And now, we mix Hindu and Muslim tea equally before serving. And Gandhiji smiled and laughed in approbation. So those are the more subtle differences, but significant ones, that we have to bear in mind in considering what was truly alternative about the leadership that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose sought to provide to his country.
Okay, Professor. So, with your kind permission, can I proceed to our question answer session?
Yes, that is what I would really enjoy. Who will begin?
So, yes, sir.
Yes, who will begin? We need somebody to ask the first question.
Okay. First question is from my friend. See, he is asking, Professor Bose, would we begin by exploring how Subhash Chandra Bose's vision of nationalism challenges the dominant narratives of Congress-led Indian nationalism? Would you say his approach represents an alternative path rather than a deviation from mainstream political thought?
Yes, I would prefer to use the term alternative rather than deviation. And again, we have to understand that Subhash Chandra Bose plunged into the freedom struggle after resigning from the ICS in 1921, at a time when Mahatma Gandhi was leading the non-cooperation and Khilafat movement. And he remained an important participant and leader of the Congress-orchestrated movements for the next 20 years, for 2 decades. Now, of course, he had a questioning mind. So we have to understand that when he met Gandhiji for the first time in July of 1921 in Bombay, he asked many questions. For example, Gandhiji had promised Swaraj within a year. And Subhash Chandra Bose was not entirely convinced that there was a strategy to achieve Swaraj within a year. So you can see already some skepticism, even as he joined the movement led by Mahatma Gandhi. And then, of course, once he came to Kolkata, he found a leader whom he could really accept fully with his heart, and that was Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das. But then you find in 1928, Subhash Chandra Bose is calling for complete independence. He brought a resolution, basically advocating Purna Swaraj, which was an amendment which went against the Motilal Nehru report's recommendation that dominion status should be the goal of the Congress. And there again, there was a difference with Gandhi, and it was after Gandhi's intervention that Subhash Chandra Bose's amendment was narrowly defeated. Gandhiji said that if dominion status was not achieved within a year, then he himself would become an independence wala, as he put it. And as a result, Subhash Chandra Bose's amendment was narrowly defeated, but Purna Swaraj was adopted as the goal of the Indian National Congress the following year. So, Subhash Chandra Bose was always a step ahead of the other leaders of the Indian National Congress. The following year, he called for the establishment of a parallel government, not just accepting the goal of Purna Swaraj. Perhaps the most insightful analysis of Gandhian leadership during the 1920s and early 1930s is provided in Subhash Chandra Bose's lecture, which was read in absentia in London in 1933, titled The Anti-Imperialist Struggle and Samyavada. And there he, assessed both the strengths and weaknesses of the Gandhian leadership and movement. He actually accepted that Gandhi had chosen the right method of struggle, nonviolent non-cooperation, in 1920. But he felt that Gandhi made mistakes in terms of deciding, when to negotiate and when to go for uncompromising resistance and mass movement. And as I said, in his articulation of the philosophy of Samya or Sammo, equality, I think he was more resolute, he was more committed than the rest of the Gandhian leadership. And in the late 1930s, of course, we find that at one level, Gandhiji and Subhash Chandra Bose were working together. We know that during the AICC meeting in Calcutta, Gandhiji was living in Sharat Chandra Bose's house. They were very close. It was Gandhi who chose Subhash Chandra Bose to be Rashtrapati or President of the Indian National Congress to begin with. And during 1938, they did work together. And if you look at the poster that you have for this 100th event of Voices from the Periphery, you see Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose sitting next to each other on the dais. And that was a picture that really enthused millions of Indians, that these were two streams that had come together. There was a brief, and shall I say, a temporary parting of their ways in 1939, and this happened for a variety of reasons. One was, of course, Subhash Chandra Bose is committed to a more full-blooded socialism, a greater commitment to equality, as I mentioned, a difference of opinion as to the timing of the next mass struggle. Subhash Chandra Bose wanted Gandhi to launch another mass movement. Gandhi felt that the country was not yet ready. But most importantly, I think, we have to go back to this question of how the two strands saw the challenge of negotiating Hindu-Muslim unity. Subhash Chandra Bose believed that in the Muslim majority provinces, the Congress should form coalition governments. And he had been trying very hard, even in Bengal, to see whether, the lost opportunity of 1937 could be revived in 1938, and a coalition forged with the Krishak Praja Party and so forth. But he also, believed that there should be an inquiry into what the grievances of the Muslims were in the Congress-ruled provinces. But unfortunately, Gandhi in December 1938 decided to listen to the advice of G.D. Birla and Nalini Ranjan Sarkar, and Subhash Chandra Bose was dismayed that he felt he had the correct approach to trying and building the unity among religious communities, and that, I think, contributed to the contested election of January 1939, which Subhash Chandra Bose won. But Subhash Chandra Bose always felt that his differences were more with those who were self-avowed Gandhians than with Mahatma Gandhi himself. And so he tried to suggest that he had no quarrel with the Mahatma and that he wanted to win the trust of Gandhi. But when I say that his problem was with other Gandhians, of course, he had differences of opinion with Vallabhbhai Patel, who belonged to the right wing of the Congress. But even just think of who brought the resolution at Tripuri, which made it impossible for Subhash Chandra Bose to continue as Congress president. It was Govind Ballabh Pant, the premier of the United Provinces. And here was a leader who represented that strand of the Indian National Congress, which willy-nilly accepted an element of religious majoritarianism in the politics of the Congress, which Subhash Chandra Bose did not believe in. And that was his alternative. How can we build unity based on equality? Equality between religious communities, equality among the varied linguistic groups of India, equality, among the genders, men and women having equal rights, and so forth. So that was the kind of alternative that Subhash Chandra Bose represented.
Thank you so much, Professor. I think Subhashish Banerjee, raised a hand. And Subhashish sir, you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes. আমি বাংলায় বলছি। নমস্কার স্যার, আমি শুভাশিস ব্যানার্জি বিশ্বভারতী থেকে মাস্টার্স করছি হিস্ট্রিতে। স্যার, আমার একটা প্রশ্ন আছে যে স্যার, সুভাষ চন্দ্র বোসের আর্মি সম্পর্কে কি ধারণা ছিল এবং সেই ধারণা নেহেরু কিংবা গান্ধী ধারণা থেকে ঠিক কতটা আলাদা ছিল?
প্রথম কথা হচ্ছে যে অবশ্যই সুভাষচন্দ্র খানিকটা কাজী নজরুল ইসলামের মতো মিলিটারি ট্রেনিং নিয়েছিলেন যখন উনি ইউনিভার্সিটিতে পড়াশোনা করতেন, ইউনিভার্সিটি ট্রেনিং করে। কিন্তু উনি বিশ্বাস করতেন যে শেষ পর্যন্ত আমাদের একটা সশস্ত্র সংগ্রাম করতে হবে স্বাধীনতা অর্জন করবার জন্য। আর এই যে আমি বললাম যে 20 বছর ধরে সুভাষচন্দ্র কংগ্রেসের মধ্যে থেকে কাজ করেছেন, নেতৃত্ব দিয়েছেন 1921 থেকে 1940 সাল অব্দি, জানুয়ারি 1941 সাল অব্দি, যে সময় সুভাষচন্দ্রের মহানিষ্ক্রমণ হলো, কলকাতা থেকে উনি বেরিয়ে পড়লেন। এখন উনি দেখলেন যে এই যে 20 বছর ধরে নানান আন্দোলন হয়েছে, যেমন অহিংস আন্দোলন 1919 থেকে 1922 অব্দি, সিভিল ডিসোবিডিয়েন্স মুভমেন্ট হয়েছে 1930 থেকে প্রায় 1934 অব্দি, দুটি স্তরে, দুই ভাগে। অথচ উনি দেখলেন যে সাধারণ মানুষ, সিভিলিয়ান ম্যাসেস, তারা কিন্তু মহাত্মা গান্ধীর ডাকে তারা সকলে স্বাধীনতা আন্দোলনে যোগ দিয়েছে। অথচ যারা ভারতীয় সেনানী এবং ইংরেজরা অবশ্যই তাদের নিজেদের তত্ত্ব জারি করেছিল যে কেউ কেউ হচ্ছে মার্শাল রেস, কেউ কেউ হচ্ছে নন মার্শাল রেস। অতএব তারা বিশেষভাবে পাঞ্জাব থেকে, উত্তর পশ্চিম সীমান্ত থেকে তারা সৈন্যদের রিক্রুট করত। এখন তারা কিন্তু সেটা দেখা গেল যে তারা কিন্তু তখনও ইংরেজদের হয়ে যুদ্ধ করছে, ইংরেজদের সাম্রাজ্য রক্ষার জন্য তারা লড়াই করছে। অতএব এই যে মহানিষ্ক্রমণের সিদ্ধান্ত, এর পেছনেও কিন্তু ছিল নেতাজির একটি সুচিন্তিত মত যে আমাকে যারা ভারতীয় সৈন্য তাদের কাছে পৌঁছতে হবে, এবং তারা কোথায়? ইংরেজদের যারা শত্রু তাদের হাতে অনেকে বন্দী হয়েছে। অতএব উনি যখন কলকাতা থেকে বেরিয়ে পড়লেন 16-17 জানুয়ারির রাত্রে, আমার বাবা শিশির কুমার বসু তখন মেডিকেল কলেজে ছাত্র, গাড়ি চালিয়ে নিয়ে গেলেন ওয়ান্ডারার গাড়ি করে কলকাতা থেকে গোমো অব্দি। এবং সেখান থেকে উনি মোহাম্মদ জিয়াউদ্দিন ছদ্মবেশে দিল্লি পেশাওয়ার হয়ে কাবুল পৌঁছলেন, তারপরে গেলেন ইউরোপ, কারণ সেখানে ভারতীয় সৈন্যরা তখন বন্দী। এবং শেষ পর্যন্ত উনি দেখলেন যে উত্তর পশ্চিম থেকে তার পক্ষে আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজ নিয়ে আসা সম্ভব নয়, কারণ জার্মানি তখন সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়নকে আক্রমণ করে 1941 জুন মাসে, 22 জুন। শেষ পর্যন্ত তাকে আসতে হলো ডুবোজাহাজে করে এশিয়াতে, এবং সেখানে উনি প্রথমত অনেক সৈন্যদের তো পেলেনি, কারণ তারা সিঙ্গাপুরে ফেব্রুয়ারি মাসের 1942 সালে তারা জাপানিদের হাতে সারেন্ডার করেছিল, এবং উনি ইন্ডিয়ান ন্যাশনাল আর্মি প্রথমে গড়ে উঠেছিল, তবে নেতাজির নেতৃত্ব প্রয়োজন ছিল। উনি এসে সেই নেতৃত্ব দিলেন জুলাই 1943 থেকে। কিন্তু উনি যেটা পেলেন এশিয়াতে সেটা হচ্ছে বেশ কিছু সৈন্য যারা সেই পুরনো ইংরেজদের মার্শাল রেসেস থেকেই যাদের নেওয়া হয়েছিল আর্মিতে। কিন্তু আরো যেটা উনি পেলেন সেটা হচ্ছে প্রায় 30 লক্ষ ভারতীয় একটা মানে সিভিলিয়ান সোশ্যাল বেস, সেটাও উনি পেলেন সিঙ্গাপুরে, মালয়াতে, থাইল্যান্ডে, বার্মাতে, এশিয়ার অন্যান্য দেশে। এবং তার ভিত্তিতেই উনি আজাদ হিন্দ সরকার করতে পারলেন, আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজ তৈরি করলেন। এবং আমাদের মনে হয় আজকে নিশ্চয়ই স্মরণ করা উচিত যে প্রথম ডিভিশন আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজের তার নেতৃত্বে ছিলেন মোহাম্মদ জামান কিয়ানি, তিনি পাঞ্জাবের মানুষ, এবং এই ডিভিশনের 4টি ব্রিগেড ছিল, 3টির নাম নেতাজি দিয়েছিলেন, গান্ধী ব্রিগেড, নেহেরু ব্রিগেড, আজাদ ব্রিগেড। কারণ উনি ভারতবর্ষের ভেতরে গান্ধীজি যে ভারত ছাড়ো আন্দোলন শুরু করেছিলেন অগাস্ট 1942-এ, তার সঙ্গে একটা একাত্মতা দেখাবার উনি চেষ্টা করেছিলেন। আর এটাও মনে রাখা দরকার যে 1942-এর পরে কিন্তু দ্বিতীয় বিশ্বযুদ্ধর বিষয়ে গান্ধীজি এবং নেতাজির মধ্যে সেরকম কোনো মতপার্থক্য আর ছিল না। দুজনেই কিন্তু এই যুদ্ধের সুযোগ নিয়ে ভারতবর্ষের স্বাধীনতা অর্জন করবার জন্য এগিয়ে এসেছিলেন। একজন ডাক দিয়েছিলেন ভারত ছাড়ো আন্দোলনের, আর আরেকজন নেতৃত্ব দিয়েছিলেন আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজের। আর শেষ পর্যন্ত যদি আমরা দেখি, এই আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজ কিন্তু ভারতীয় সৈন্যদের মধ্যে তাদের ইংরেজদের প্রতি আনুগত্য একেবারে টলিয়ে দিতে পেরেছিল। সেটা আমরা দেখতে পাই যখন লালকেল্লায় বিচার হলো সাইগাল, ধিলান, শাহনওয়াজের 1945-এর নভেম্বর মাস থেকে 31শে ডিসেম্বর অব্দি 1945 সালের। তাদের সাজা হলো ঠিক যে সাজা দেওয়া হয়েছিল বাহাদুর শাহ জাফরকে, ডিপোর্টেশন ফর লাইফ। কিন্তু 3 দিনের মধ্যে ক্লড অকিনলেক, যিনি ছিলেন কমান্ডার ইন চিফ, তিনি বাধ্য হলেন এদের মুক্তি দিয়ে দেওয়ার জন্য। এবং অতএব আমরা যেটা দেখতে পাই যে ওই যেটা একটা ঘাটতি ছিল আমাদের, যে ভারতীয় সৈন্যরা কিন্তু যোগ দিচ্ছে না আমাদের এই স্বাধীনতা আন্দোলনে, সেই ঘাটতিটা একেবারে পূরণ করে দিয়েছিলেন নেতাজি সুভাষচন্দ্র বসু। এবং তারপরে ইংরেজদের আর কোনো সুযোগ ছিল না ভারতবর্ষ এবং অন্যান্য সাম্রাজ্যের অন্যান্য দেশগুলোকেও দাবিয়ে রাখার ভারতীয় সৈন্যদের ব্যবহার করে।
আমার আরেকটা প্রশ্ন ছিল, করতে পারি কি?
হ্যাঁ,
স্যার, আমার একটা প্রশ্ন, সেটা হচ্ছে যে সুভাষচন্দ্র বসুর সাথে বামপন্থীদের সম্পর্ক কিরকম ছিল? তিনি কি তাদের উপর ঠিক ভরসা করতে পেরেছিলেন?
সুভাষচন্দ্র বসু নিজেকে বামপন্থী মনে করতেন। আমি একটু আগেও যেটা বললাম, তিনি মনে করতেন যে তার রাজনৈতিক চিন্তাধারা যদি একটি কথায় প্রকাশ করতে হয় সেটি হচ্ছে সাম্যবাদ। এখন অবশ্য বামপন্থীদের মধ্যেও নানান রকম ভেদাভেদ ছিল। যেমন কমিউনিস্ট পার্টি তৈরি হয়েছিল 20-এর দশকের প্রথম দিকেই, তারপরে 1934 সাল থেকে কংগ্রেসের ভেতরে একটি কংগ্রেস সোশ্যালিস্ট পার্টি গড়ে উঠেছিল, এবং মোটামুটি তাছাড়া মানবেন্দ্রনাথ রায় ফিরে এসে ভারতবর্ষে তার র্যাডিক্যাল হিউম্যানিস্ট পার্টি শুরু করেছিলেন 30-এর দশকে, বিশেষ করে জেল থেকে ছাড়া পাওয়ার পর। আর আমরা মোটামুটি বলতে পারি যে কোনো একটি গোষ্ঠীর সদস্য বা নেতা না হয়ে কংগ্রেসের মধ্যে যে একটা বামপন্থী বা বামের দিকে হেলা একটা ধারা ছিল, তার নেতৃত্ব দিয়েছিলেন জওহরলাল নেহেরু এবং সুভাষ চন্দ্র বসু। এখন এই সব বামপন্থীরাই কিন্তু শেষ পর্যন্ত যখন একটা নির্বাচন হলো রাষ্ট্রপতির, যেটা কথা আমি একটু আগে বললাম, জানুয়ারি 1939-এ, তারা সকলেই সুভাষচন্দ্র বসুকে সমর্থন করেছিল। এবং আমরা যদি দেখি সুভাষচন্দ্র বসুর সমর্থন নানান প্রদেশ থেকে পাওয়া গিয়েছিল, উত্তরপ্রদেশ থেকে, পাঞ্জাব থেকে, আসাম থেকে সেখানে জয়ী হয়েছিলেন নেতাজি, কর্ণাটক, তামিলনাড়ু, কেরালা, সেসব জায়গায় জয়ী হয়েছিলেন। পিছিয়ে ছিলেন গুজরাটে এবং অন্ধ্রতে, কারণ গান্ধীজি পট্টবি সীতারামাইয়াকে করেছিলেন তার প্রতিনিধি এই নির্বাচনে। তবে আমরা যেটা দেখি যে তার 2 মাস পরেই ত্রিপুরীতে সব বামপন্থীরা একসাথে থাকতে পারেনি, এবং কংগ্রেস সোশ্যালিস্ট পার্টিও অ্যাবস্টেইন না করলে হয়তো গোবিন্দ বল্লভ পান্তের সেই রেজলিউশন যে সুভাষচন্দ্রকে, রাষ্ট্রপতিকে এমন একটি কংগ্রেস ওয়ার্কিং কমিটি গঠন করতে হবে, রেজলিউশনে বলা ছিল মানে ইট মাস্ট হ্যাভ দ্য ইমপ্লিসিট কনফিডেন্স অফ মহাত্মা গান্ধী and it should be constituted in consultation with Mahatma Gandhi. সুভাষচন্দ্র চেষ্টা করেছিলেন, কিন্তু মহাত্মা গান্ধী কোনো নাম দিলেন না, তাই কনসাল্ট করতে পারছিলেন না। অতএব তাকে পদত্যাগ করতে হলো এপ্রিল মাসের শেষে এই রাষ্ট্রপতি পদ থেকে। তাই আমরা দেখতে পাই যে এই বিভিন্ন বামপন্থীরা আর কমিউনিস্টরা তখন অবশ্যই ন্যাশনাল ফ্রন্ট এই একটা লেবেল নিয়ে তারা স্বাধীনতা সংগ্রামে ছিল, কিন্তু সকলে একসাথে থাকতে পারেনি। একটা লেফট কনসলিডেশন কমিটি করবার চেষ্টা হয়েছিল, কিন্তু নানান মতভেদ বামপন্থীদের একত্রে শেষ পর্যন্ত রাখতে পারেনি। এবং সবশেষে যেটা বলার প্রয়োজন সেটা হচ্ছে যে নেতাজি তো জানুয়ারি 1941-এ দেশের বাইরে গেলেন, এবং জুন মাসে 1941-এ যখন জার্মানি সোভিয়েত ইউনিয়নকে আক্রমণ করলো, তখন কমিউনিস্টরা বিশেষ করে ঠিক করলো যে এটা আর ইম্পিরিয়ালিস্ট ওয়ার নয়, এটা পিপলস ওয়ার। অতএব তারা গান্ধীজির ভারত ছাড়ো আন্দোলনেরও বিরোধিতা করেছিল, আবার নেতাজি সুভাষচন্দ্রের নেতৃত্বে আজাদ হিন্দ আন্দোলনেরও বিরোধিতা করেছিল। এবং সেদিক থেকে দেখতে গেলে সেই ধরনের সেই ওই বামপন্থী ঐক্য সেই সময় বজায় রাখা সম্ভব হয়নি। তবে নেতাজি সবসময় বিশ্বাস করতেন যে তিনি সাম্যের ভিত্তিতে ঐক্য গড়ে তুলতে পারবেন আমাদের দেশে, এবং সেই কাজটা তিনি করে রেখেছিলেন তার আজাদ হিন্দ ফৌজে।
ধন্যবাদ স্যার।
Thank you so much, Professor. Saurabh Jha, you can unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, so myself Saurabh Kumar Jain, I'm from Santiniketan University. Sir, as Netaji entitled Gandhiji as the father of nation, but there are many who didn't consider him as a father of nation. So my question is to you that should we consider him or not? Just sir, I wanted to know your point of view. Should we consider him as father of nation or not?
Yes, I believe
Thank you,
that
sir.
Mahatma Gandhi should be considered the father of our nation. It was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose who first described him as such in a broadcast from Rangoon on Azad Hind Radio. And Netaji's Minister of Publicity in his Azad Hind government has left a beautiful description of that moment because he was present in the studio as Netaji was making that historic broadcast. And first of all, Netaji justified in detail what he had done between January of 1941 and 1944 in leading the Azad Hind Fauj and the Azad Hind government. And then at the end, he addressed Mahatma Gandhi, father of our nation, he said, in this holy war of liberation, we ask for your blessings and good wishes. And Iyer has said how his voice quivered and then became firm and with resolve. And as I mentioned, in many ways, Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose came much closer together once they had no opportunity to meet one another. Netaji, of course, went on his great escape in January 1941, but on the basic principles of India's freedom struggle, they came to agree much more during that period of the 1940s than ever before. Subhash Chandra Bose, of course, had also made radio broadcasts supporting the Quit India movement, making suggestions about strategy from August 1942 onwards. And I have in my book, His Majesty's Opponent, cited a very fascinating conversation that Mahatma Gandhi had with Louis Fisher in June of 1942 in Sevagram, Wardha. And he basically told, Gandhiji basically told Louis Fisher that, your president talks about the four freedoms. Does that include the freedom to be free? And he pointed out that there were many fascist elements in British imperial rule in India, and that is what Indians have to encounter every day. And Louis Fisher then asked him about Subhash Chandra Bose, and at that stage, Mahatma Gandhi said that Subhash Chandra Bose was a patriot of patriots, but of course he added in his own way, albeit misguided. But what is also fascinating is that Gandhiji had assigned Khurshid Ben, a granddaughter of Dadabhai Nauroji, to look after his guest, Louis Fisher. And Khurshid Ben told Louis Fisher, and everybody obviously knew by that time why Netaji had gone abroad. Khurshid Ben said that if Netaji entered India at the head of an army of liberation, then he would galvanize the entire people. And she pointed out that Subhash Chandra Bose was more popular than Jawaharlal Nehru, and that in certain circumstances he had a stronger appeal than Mahatma Gandhi himself. So here you find Mahatma Gandhi referring to Netaji as a patriot of patriots, and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose addressing Mahatma Gandhi as the father of our nation. And what I will also say is that, of course, after the Red Fort trials, when Gandhiji decided to reissue his journal Harijan in early February of 1946, in his first editorial, he said, Netaji's name is one to conjure with. And he was especially impressed by the way in which Netaji had united all of the religious communities and linguistic groups of India. And if you read Mahatma Gandhi's utterances about Netaji between late 1945 and January of 1948, then you will find that every statement is in the form of a eulogy. Even the last one, which is 1 week before Gandhi's assassination, on 23rd January of 1948, he's basically saying that, Netaji was a leader who had evoked affection and loyalty from all Indians, regardless of community, in a way that no other leader had been able to do. And therefore, in his name, he appealed to the people of India to banish all communal bitterness from their hearts. And so, while acknowledging that Netaji provided an alternative leadership, we also need to recognize the mutual reverence and affection in which the Mahatma and Netaji held each other.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor. The next question is from Anuj. To what extent can Bose's personal charisma and leadership style be separated from his political ideology? Does his example complicate our conventional understanding of nationalism as an impersonal collective movement?
Well, Netaji was, of course, someone who had a magnetic personality. And my father, Shishir Kumar Bose, would, often say that we who had not, our generation, who had not actually encountered him, will never be able to fully understand the sort of almost hypnotic spell that he cast on his followers. In fact, at the Red Fort trial, Shahnawaz Khan had said that when he heard Netaji's speeches in Singapore, he was almost hypnotized by them. And that is what enabled him to take the decision. Would he fight for the king or his country? And, Netaji was the one who was instrumental in making that decision quite easy, sort of, for him. So obviously he was a leader for whom it is very hard to find a parallel. But then why, what was the jadoo, the magic, as it were? My view is that, he was prepared to sacrifice everything, including his life, for his country's freedom. And his followers sort of knew that. His followers knew that they were not being called upon to make any sacrifice which their own leader was not prepared to make. And, that is why, and I have, had the good fortune of meeting so many of the men and women who had worked closely with Netaji as I was growing up. And, among them was S.A. Iyer, whom I have mentioned, his Minister of Publicity, Abid Hassan, who was his only Indian companion on his submarine voyage, the leaders of the Rani of Jhansi regiment, Lakshmi Saigal, Janaki Thevar, Rathee Nahatpan, Satyavati Thevar, and others. And of course, Prem Saigal, Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, and so on, Mehboob Ahmed. And I would see that, whenever they spoke about Netaji, decades after he had passed from the scene, tears would flow down their cheeks. Once I was trying to record an interview with Mehboob Ahmed, who had fought in the Kohima sector and the Hakafalam sector of the Azad Hind Fauj. And then in 1945, once Prem Saigal went to the front, he became Netaji's military secretary in the last few months of, in the middle months of 1945. And I was trying to record an interview with him in Patna, where he lived. And each time I would roll the camera, he would break down. And I had great difficulty in recording that interview. And then he said that, why is this happening? And he said that, I had the good fortune of working with Mahatma Gandhi for the last few months of his life. Later on, I had an opportunity to work with Jawaharlal Nehru. He became a member of the Indian Foreign Service. He was our ambassador in Canada. But then he said that they were great men. But there was only one man that I was prepared to die for. And that was Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. So it is that kind of loyalty and also love that he evoked in the hearts of his followers, and in fact in the hearts of all Indians. It is very rare for a political leader to elicit that kind of love. That is what made Netaji different. And I know it also from very close personal experience. My father was a 20-year-old medical student when Netaji called him to his side and asked him a very simple question in Bangla, "Amar ekta kaj korte parbe?" And my father could not stop doing Netaji's work, his kaj, until the last day of his life, on the 30th of September of the year 2000. So that is what he was able to evoke. And it is a very special quality. But then, that was the essence of his leadership. His life was based on service to humanity, service to the people of his country, with a kind of dedication which involved huge suffering, and ultimately ready for the greatest sacrifice.
Thank you so much, sir. Saurabh, do you have any question?
Sorry sir. My last question sir. That sir, जैसे ये सेशन अल्टरनेटिव लीडरशिप के लिए है, तो मेरा क्वेश्चन आपसे ये है कि डू यू बिलीव इंडिया मिस्ड अ डिफरेंट पाथ टू इंडिपेंडेंस एंड नेशन बिल्डिंग by not embracing the leadership of Subhash Chandra Bose?
Well, yes, India missed an opportunity, but that was largely because tragically Netaji had passed from the scene by August of 1945. And of course, Mahatma Gandhi initially hoped that Netaji would return and join him in the fight for both Indian independence and Indian unity. But then by the end of March of 1946, he wrote in his journal Harijan that there was a tussle between unsupported feeling that Netaji would come back and join him, and strong evidence that had been presented to him that he had met his mortal end. And in a way, I think that Mahatma Gandhi truly missed the rebellious son, whom he had, in a way, cast aside to support his more obedient sons in 1939. But in the context of late 1945 to August 1947, I think he truly missed Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. Because, first of all, had Netaji been there, he would have carried everything before him. We saw the popular support that his soldiers received, after the Red Fort trials. So you can imagine, what the scenario would have been with Netaji. And Netaji alone, I think, had the trust of all of the religious communities of India, all of the different linguistic groups of India. And he was the only one who would have been able to prevent the tragic partition of India along religious lines, because everybody knew that he was just and fair, and that he would be able to bring about an equitable sharing of power in free India. I might add that Netaji also believed that a genuine constituent assembly could only come into being after the seizure of power by Indian nationalists. So, for example, in late 1939, when the Congress was toying with the idea of a constituent assembly under imperialist auspices, he said that this would be wrong, and this might be the greatest fraud perpetrated on the Indian people by their own leaders. This is a bit like the Irish Convention that Lloyd George had brought into being, which the Sinn Féin had boycotted. He also said that the Bolsheviks were right to walk out of the Russian Constituent Assembly. He felt that only a popularly elected Constituent Assembly in free India could, have set up the proper constitutional structure to achieve the kind of samyavad that Netaji believed in. Way back in a letter to Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das in March of 1921, even before he had resigned from the ICS, he had written that we must now write our own constitution based on Swaraj, on self-rule. And therefore, he had his own vision of free India, which unfortunately post-independence India did not pursue. And that's why we must remember today that Netaji was not just a warrior hero. He was. But he was a very thoughtful person with a philosophical bent of mind. And he had some very clear ideas about the social and economic reconstruction of India based on equality after political freedom was won. And those are the aspects of his thought which I think are most relevant today. So I believe that the younger generation of Indians have a lot to learn from his book of life. And yes, there were missed opportunities in the post-independence period, but that does not mean we cannot begin to implement some of Netaji's grand ideas in the 21st century.
So much, sir. Subhashish,
ইয়েস স্যার, আমার আরেকটা প্রশ্ন আছে যে সুভাষচন্দ্র বসুর প্রতি আমাদের প্রত্যেকের মধ্যেই একটা আবেগ কাজ করে, কিন্তু স্যার ইতিহাসের ছাত্র হিসাবে আমরা আবেগকে দূরে সরিয়ে কিভাবে নিরপেক্ষ ইতিহাস চর্চা করতে পারি, এটা একটু বলবেন?
এখানে দুটো কথা বলার আছে। কেবলমাত্র আবেগ যথেষ্ট নয়, এই কথাটা আমার বাবা শিশির কুমার বসু বিশ্বাস করতেন। উনি দেখলেন যে 1947-এর পরে নেতাজির প্রতি সাধারণ মানুষের আবেগ আছে, কিন্তু শুধু আবেগ যথেষ্ট নয় উনি বললেন। তাই জন্য উনি ঠিক করলেন যে নেতাজির সম্পর্কে যত প্রামাণ্য নথি আছে, তার নিজের চিঠিপত্র, তার ছবি, তার কণ্ঠস্বর, তার ফিল্ম ফুটেজ, তার সমস্ত লেখা একত্রিত করতে হবে। তার জীবন ছড়িয়ে আছে প্রায় সারা বিশ্বে, ইউরোপ এবং এশিয়ার নানা দেশে, এবং এগুলি পরবর্তী প্রজন্মের জন্য ভালোভাবে সংরক্ষণ করতে হবে, যাতে আমরা আবেগের বশে যেন আসল নেতাজিকে ভুলে না যাই ভবিষ্যতে। তাই প্রথম কথা হচ্ছে, আবেগ যথেষ্ট নয়, প্রামাণ্য কাজ, খানিকটা নিরপেক্ষ ঐতিহাসিক গবেষণা ও চর্চার বিশেষ প্রয়োজন রয়েছে। তবে কথাও মনে রাখা দরকার যে আমরা কিন্তু আজকাল কেবলমাত্র একটা খুব নিষ্প্রাণ ইতিহাস চর্চায় আর বিশ্বাস করি না। আমাদের আর্কাইভ এখন অনেক বড় হয়ে গেছে। আমরা শুধু যে কতগুলো সরকারি কাগজপত্র দেখে ইতিহাস লিখি তা কিন্তু আজ ঠিক নয় আর। এবং তাই এই যে আবেগ নেতাজির প্রতি, বা যে আবেগ ছিল আমাদের স্বাধীনতা আন্দোলনে, যে আবেগের ফলেই আমাদের স্বাধীনতা সংগ্রামীরা অনেক ত্যাগ স্বীকার করতে রাজি হয়েছিলেন, সেই আবেগের ইতিহাসও কিন্তু আমাদের লেখা উচিত। তাই আমি দুটি উত্তর দেব প্রশ্নের এই প্রশ্নের প্রসঙ্গে।
Sir. Next question is actually my question, that Bose's strategies involved engaging with global powers during World War II, including both the Allied and Axis powers. So how did these transnational connections reshape his conception of India's freedom struggle, and how should we critically evaluate these alliances in terms of ethics and pragmatism?
Yes, I mean, there were, at least a couple of leaders of the Indian National Congress who were interested in international affairs, and they were, Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. And Subhash Chandra Bose always believed that, in fact, one shortcoming of the Gandhian movement was that it did not take full advantage of international forces. Now, there were many other thinkers who, were also interested in studying the interaction of what were often called world forces. For example, Binoy Kumar Sarkar, about whom I've written in my most recent book, Asia After Europe. And Netaji was interested in analyzing the global balance of power. Throughout the 1930s, we often forget that he was in European exile from March 1933 to March 1936, and he again visited Europe from November 1937 to January 1938. That was when he set up friendship associations in practically every European country. That was when he mobilized Indian students to become participants in India's freedom struggle in foreign lands. So he always had this vision that India's freedom struggle would unfold on the global stage. Finally, he decided that it was important to take advantage of an international war crisis when the Second World War broke out in September of 1939. And he, believed that even India in subjection must have an independent foreign policy. And he was pursuing what could be termed as a realist foreign policy. And it was not as simple as following the dictum, enemies, enemies, my friend. As I have explained, he absolutely needed to reach Indian soldiers, and he could only find them in territories of the enemies of Britain in this Second World War. So I believe that he took the correct decision in January 1941, that is what made him Netaji. And he was able to do something that was almost extraordinary. Just consider 1 year in his life, 1943. At the beginning of the year, he was still in Europe, wanting to go to Asia for almost a year, but not having succeeded. Then he embarks on a 90-day submarine voyage from Kiel in Germany to Sabang in Sumatra. He then becomes the supreme commander of the Indian National Army. He proclaims the Azad Hind government. And before the end of the year, he was standing on Indian soil, on the Andaman Islands, and hailing the liberation of the cellular jail where the British had oppressed our greatest revolutionaries. So that itself shows how he was able to take advantage of the contradictions among global forces, and he was quite clear that we have to take advantage of the conflict between the old imperial powers and the new imperial powers in order to advance the cause of the freedom of the colonized countries of Asia and also Africa. And he also had a very clear sense of what the freedom of India would mean for the rest of humanity. He was very fond of saying, India freed means humanity saved.
Thank you so much, Professor. Next question is from Rathee. She is asking, Subhash Chandra Bose occupies a unique space in India's collective memory. How has historiography, nationalist myth-making, and state narratives shaped the way we remember him? Are there important voices or perspectives that remain marginalized in these accounts?
Well, I think, as I said in response to an earlier question, that simply emotion is not enough, and at the same time, the place of emotion must be recognized in the writing of history and in our historiography. Sometimes I constantly, get this question that, was he accorded his proper place in post-independence India? Did he get the correct sort of official recognition and so forth? And to my mind, that is not a very important question, because he was always considered a great popular hero by the masses of ordinary Indians, South Asians, Asians. In fact, his popularity extends well beyond what are the current borders of the Indian nation state. So whether the government gave him proper recognition of or not is actually not all that significant when you've sort of become the emperor of the emotions of most people in your country. And then there are problems, with official recognition, of which he's getting some these days. But you cannot truly honor this man simply in the form of granite statues. As I said, he was not just a warrior hero. If you genuinely want to honor him, then you should also be prepared to study and hopefully follow some of the ideals that he believed in. And at this moment of India's history, what we need to remember is his absolute commitment to unity based on equality. So just garlanding his statue doesn't count for much. As for students of history, what I would say is that it is important. I mean, he would have always wanted students to have a questioning mind, to have critical perspectives, and so on. And therefore, I think there is new room for new kinds of sort of research. And again, this was the first question that came from a woman, I think, in this in this discussion and conversation that we are having. And again, my mother, Krishna Bose, has written on, for example, his role in building the Rani of Jhansi regiment. But she has also written on the important women in his life, including his mother, Prabhavati, his sister-in-law, Vibhavati, his second mother, Bhashanti Devi, the widow of Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, of course his wife, Emily Schenkel, and so on. But she has also written about various European women who became supporters of India's freedom struggle, those whom he had met in that 1933 to 1936 period. And I think there is room for even more research on those aspects of Netaji's sort of life and work. There are points of departure in some of Krishna Bose's writings, which can actually open the pathways to new research as well.
Thank you, Professor. Next question is from Arun. He is asking, unlike the Gandhian emphasis on non-violent struggle, Bose promoted mass mobilization and militant activism. How does this alternative strategy alter our understanding of the spectrum of anti-colonial resistance in India?
Well, I started by saying that we should not accept the easy dichotomy between non-violent mass movements and the revolutionary, armed struggles for freedom. There were many both discursive and organizational connections between the two. What can be said, of course, is that in post-independence India, there was always some degree of lip service to Gandhi, and we recited as a formula, at least in official discourse, that India came to independence through non-violence and so on, while not accepting any of Gandhi's ideas and ideas. And therefore there was maybe a certain kind of a lack of attention to the important revolutionary armed struggles, which complemented in very interesting ways the non-violent mass movements. So in many ways, Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose provides an absolutely brilliant example of somebody who represented both of these, strands which intermingled. He understood that for a basically disarmed populace, non-violent non-cooperation, civil disobedience were important strategies that should be accepted. But he also felt that in the final climactic moment, and armed struggle would be necessary, especially if there was not to be an unholy compromise with the forces of British imperialism. And in that, he partially succeeded, but because he was not on the scene, there was that ultimate compromise based on a partition along religious lines.
Thank you so much. Next question is from Piali. She is asking, Bose's nationalism had to navigate India's diverse religious, regional, and linguistic landscape. Did his vision genuinely accommodate plural identities, or did it risk imposing a homogenized conception of the nation?
That's a very good question. My interpretation is that Jawaharlal Nehru's brand of secularism tended towards a kind of secular uniformity, and that in some ways tended towards imposing what is being described as a homogenized view of the nation. And I think it's important to recognize today that, both secularism and socialism became ideologies of state that bolstered this kind of homogeneity, uniformity, centralized state authority. But I believe that Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did have a genuine respect for what is being described by the questioner as pluralism. The myriad religious and linguistic differences. Now, he of course came from Bengal, and from the very beginning, we have to understand that he was a political disciple of Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, who first of all believed in federalism, that the different linguistic regions should come together in a federal union, and he believed that such a federal India ought to become part in the future of an Asiatic federation. One needs to bring together the other oppressed nations of Asia. And Subhash Chandra Bose, for example, constantly repeated, and one of the best statements of both cultural intimacy that I talked about at the very outset, and also the vision of an independent federal republic, can be found in a 1928 speech that he gave as the president of the Maharashtra Provincial Political Conference. So Netaji believed in an independent federal republic. And he knew that in Bengal, just over 50% of the population was Muslim, just under 50% of the population was Hindu. Therefore, there had to be an equitable sharing of power. And this is an important political tradition in Bengal, which Bengal tried to offer to the rest of India. If you go back to 1923, the Swarajists led by Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das and Subhash Chandra Bose forged the Bengal Pact, which would have provided for an equitable sharing of power and resources between the two major religious communities, and then Bengal would be a building block for a federal India, and the federal India would be perhaps a key building block for a larger Asiatic federation. So that was his view. Of course, during the 1930s and 1940s, there were many other political experiments that were taking place in different parts of the world. And so Subhash Chandra Bose was studying the various socialist experiments that were taking place. And therefore, as with many other left-leaning leaders, perhaps occasionally he veered towards saying that we may need a fairly strong center to carry out radical and social and economic reforms. But he never went to the extent of Nehru in ending up believing in some kind of a statist socialism, because he emerged out of this, political tradition that, emphasized a genuine and substantive federal union of India. So if you look at the entire corpus of his works, and I have to I've had to go through them because with my father I edited the collected works. Then you find that here was someone who was very much part of an intellectual and political tradition which tried to forge unity based on respect for various religious and linguistic diversities.
Thank you so much, sir. Next question is from Shalvir. He is asking, Bose's wartime decisions and pragmatic alliances often spark ethical debates. How should historians reconcile the tension between moral ideas and political necessity in evaluating his life and actions?
I think it's important to look at both ethics and politics, and therefore I think if you look at Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, there was always a very strong moral foundation of his anti-colonial politics. But at the level of foreign policy, India's relations with global powers, there was an element of political realism that he accepted. But that was because I think he believed that the overriding moral necessity of his times was the freedom of vast masses of people in Asia and Africa who had been suffering and who had been dehumanized under Western colonial rule. That was the overriding moral necessity of that time. And that is why even Gandhi, as I pointed out, said to Louis Fisher, your president talks about the four freedoms. Does it include the freedom to be free? That was what he had asked. And how can we forget that the direct experience of the colonized peoples in Asia and Africa was in fact exploitation, the complete abjection of colonial rule by Western imperial powers. And yes, of course, there were many crimes that were committed in Europe, which we all know about, by states with which Subhash Chandra Bose made formal alliances in the cause of India's freedom. But think about 1943 in Bengal, a devastating famine, a man-made, completely avoidable famine. And there is Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose asking the British for the safe passage of ships from Burma in August of 1943 to carry relief supplies of rice. And that is being nervously suppressed. So, let us be clear about what the moral imperatives were of the times through which Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose lived in making this assessment of what the right relationship should be between ethical imperatives and political pragmatism.
Next question is from Aditi. Why does Bose remain such a contentious figure in Indian historiography? What do these debates reveal about the politics of memory, the exercise of historical authority, and the shaping of national imagination?
In many ways, I don't think he's a very contentious figure in Indian history. I'm not entirely sure, because I think that, as I said, I mean, he has been, of course, a great popular hero among the Indian masses. But if you're thinking in terms of historical writing on him, well, you might say that there was a certain period particularly in British writing of Indian history, when wartime propaganda against him cast a long shadow over the way in which he was treated. But then those who actually conducted serious historical research on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose were always able to offer a balanced assessment. And so if you actually think in terms of, let's say, British historians who have recently written histories of the Second World War, think of the 2 volumes by Chris Bailey and Tim Harper. I think, they offer a very balanced assessment, not just of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, but also of the various anti-colonial freedom struggles in South and Southeast Asia, covering the entire arc from Singapore to Calcutta. If you think in terms of some of the works by non-Indian historians on Subhash Chandra Bose, there is, of course, the biography of Sharath and Subhash Chandra Bose by Leonard Gordon, Brothers Against the Raj, which came out in 1990 from Columbia University Press, which I think is very well founded on archival materials and offers an interpretation of Subhash Chandra Bose, which I think is not contentious at all. Or if you think in terms of the Indian National Army that Netaji led, there are 2 American historians who wrote about it, Joyce Lebra and Peter Fay, which are, well worth reading. So I think that, the contentiousness that may have been a residue of wartime propaganda has gradually receded. And there are works on Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose based on, solid historical research.
So, Professor, when we look beyond India, how does Bose's alternative nationalism compare with other anti-colonial movements globally, like Ho Chi Minh's Vietnam or Jomo Kenyatta's Kenya or the Irish independence struggle? What insights do these comparisons offer about leadership, strategy, and ideological flexibility?
Well, again, this is an area for potential sort of further research, which is, I think it's important to engage in a comparative study of both imperialism, British, French, Dutch, American in Asia, and the comparisons, but also connections between different anti-colonial movements, anti-colonial nationalist movements. This is a vast question which, cannot be answered in brief. But what I will say, since you mentioned the Irish independence movement, Subhash Chandra Bose closely studied the Irish anti-colonial nationalist movement. In fact, if you read his letters from Mandalay and his prison notebooks that he kept in Mandalay, he became a very keen student of Irish history and Irish literature. He even transcribed his favorite Irish poems by poets like Dora Sigerson or Patrick Pearse and so forth. And he considered the high point of his European sojourn to be his visit to Ireland in February of 1936, when he had 3 meetings with Imon de Valera. So he was constantly studying, the experience of the Irish anti-colonial movement and trying to draw lessons for India. He even had a midnight meeting with De Valera in London just before coming back in 1938 to take up the presidency of the Indian National Congress. And what he also learned from all of this are the British attempts to define majorities and minorities based on religious affiliation or sectarian affiliation, and how that formed the basis of their divide and rule. And he carefully studied the partition of Ireland, for example, in the aftermath of the First World War. So Subhash Chandra Bose himself was trying to draw the lessons, from other, anti-colonial movements. Again, I think we have to understand that if you think about Vietnam, in the case of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh, there you find that that he was a leader of the communist movement, but in a more significant way, he was the leader of a patriotic and a nationalist movement. That was an instance where nationalism and communism became intertwined. Unfortunately, in the case of India, especially during the Second World War, the formal sort of communist movement, the party, did not align with the main strands of anti-colonial nationalism. So these are some of the differences that need to be kept in mind. And the other point that I will say is that we actually need to closely study what were the principles and the aims of anti-colonial nationalism that lost out in the final battle for state power. Very often what we inherited in the form of a post-colonial state was taken more from a British colonial legacy than what we had envisioned during our freedom struggle. And that includes, for example, the robust tradition of anti-colonial constitutionalism, of which Subhash Chandra Bose was a part, to which he made major, contributions. And therefore, we need to, as historians, to have a more critical perspective on the early post-colonial era and rediscover some of the ideas, including those of a generous and imaginative federal union of India, which lost out in 1947. আচ্ছা, এবার আমাকে শেষ করতে হবে, 1.5 ঘন্টা হয়ে গেছে।
Finally, what lessons does Bose's vision of alternative nationalism hold for us today? How might his ideas inform contemporary debates on citizenship, patriotism, dissent, and the ethics of political struggle in modern India?
First of all, I think what Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose's life and work teach us is the importance of an ethical conception of human affairs and of politics. There has to be an ethical basis to our politics. And in the context of the challenges facing contemporary India, I think we need to look at Netaji's philosophy of Samyavad, unity based on equality. I think he would have been dismayed by the kind of religious majoritarianism we see in India today, and also of various kinds of race-based majoritarianism in many other parts of the world. And so that in some ways is the most important lesson. But I would reiterate what I said in response to the previous question, that there were many ideas about how we should reconstruct society and economy, what the state should look like after independence was won, which were not implemented in the post-1947 period in South Asia. And there lies some of the roots of the problems that we face today, some very intractable ones. And therefore, we must re-examine imaginative ideas, including those of a constitution of a federal India, which were not implemented in the immediate post-1947 era, but which have acquired renewed salience in the 2020s. And therefore, there needs to be, in many ways, a radical rethinking of a new political ideology that will enable us to achieve unity based on equality.
So, before we draw this remarkable evening to a close, I wish to offer my deepest gratitude to you, Professor Bose. What you have shared with us tonight will not remain confined to this room. It will continue to resonate within us as a reminder that history is never simply a record of events, dates, or figures, but a living dialogue of ideas, choices, and aspirations that shape the very fabric of our societies. You have shown us that Subhash Chandra Bose was not merely an icon of Indian nationalism, but a figure whose vision, courage, and alternative strategies compel us to reconsider the multiple pathways through which freedom, belonging, and leadership can be imagined and enacted. Through your lecture, we have been reminded that history is never singular or predetermined. It is a terrain of debate, of contestation, and of possibility, where voices long overlooked, alternative ideologies, and daring actions illuminate the complexity of human behavior. In doing so, you have not only deepened our understanding of Bose and alternative nationalism, but also challenged us to reflect critically on the narratives we inherit and the histories we choose to remember. We are profoundly conscious that we have been in the presence of one of the greatest historians of our time, whose scholarship does not merely reconstruct the past but inspires us to engage with it imaginatively, ethically, and courageously. On behalf of Voices from the Periphery, and with the utmost respect, I thank you, Professor Bose, for this extraordinary gift of insight, reflection, and inspiration. We are truly honored. May the spirit of this evening stay with us, arguing us to approach history with curiosity, critically, and a renewed commitment to understanding the multiple possibilities that shape our world. Thank you again, Professor.
Thank you. May the voices from the periphery resonate even at centers.
Thank you so much. Shubho Mahalaya.
Tomala.